I wanted to thank you all again today for joining us. This is part of the series of SkillCon, Credit SkillCon 21, which is hosted by Hayako and also credittoday.net. Today, we've got a really interesting topic, consignment and bankruptcy reclamation under UCC and the Bankruptcy Code. And we have our illustrious speaker, Richard Macias, who is with Maynard, Cooper & Gale. And Richard has, 25, 30 years of experience. He's a Harvard Law graduate. He's been instrumental in the education of credit collection professionals really over the last many decades. And before we get started, I also wanted to basically share this legal disclaimer because we do have a lawyer, an attorney on this call. We want to know that we also got typically competitors that are in the space. So again, while we would love this to be interactive, ask any question you'd like. We want to make sure that you keep things basically according to the rules, that we don't want to get anybody in hot water here. So I want to make sure that we're all following the appropriate laws.
Well, I think what I want to start off with is just sort of lay the table for where we are in terms of the life going forward for a credit profession. And to do that, I have to look backwards. And this is where my experience in the industry sometimes comes into play. As Michelle said, unfortunately, I have been around for a long time. And so I've seen a lot of ups and downs. Back in the 90s, I was a young lawyer working as a new partner in a very big law firm. And we went through an economic explosion that was what we now call the dot-com boom. And that dot-com boom busted. And it had a substantial impact on credit function, not just in the industries related to the internet and electronics, but around the entire economy. There was this huge downturn. In California, we saw it principally impacting real estate, but it was all over the place, and there was high unemployment, and it was a real tremor in the system. But a lot of it was just basically generated because there was a lot of money that was looking for a place to go, and it went into places that ended up not being productive. Then in the 2000s, with the 9/11 issues, we saw another huge cratering in the economy. Once again, the slowdown was really a function of two things. One was steep increases in prices of certain commodities, particularly oil, and a general lack of confidence in what the future would be. There was a lot of uncertainty, and so money dried up. And once again, we saw a situation where credit became difficult and collecting became very, very difficult. And it was a time of enormous uncertainty in terms of going forward, where the economy would land. And then most recently, in the bout we had with the financial downturn in the 2008s, there again, we saw a situation where basically Wall Street came screeching to a halt. One of the things we did see is that there was a consolidation of credit. What had been a banking industry that was fairly well diversified, spread out across the country, became a very much reduced to just a few large lenders. There was a couple of banks that were doing commercial lines of credit, but virtually the entire business of lending on the bank side dried up. The banks that had been important on a regional basis got consolidated into larger banks. The bank policies on lending emphasized lines of credit for large businesses. And what we had was a situation where, once again, the access to money, which is the important thing about keeping the business world cycles going, is having money in hand to buy on credit, became very, very difficult. So where does that take us to today? I think where it takes us to, and this again, the opinion of the speaker, this is just my observations, we have a substantially different situation in line. What happened here was the economy stopped, but it stopped for reasons that had nothing to do with any economy weakness. The economy was going gangbusters. As you'll recall, it was a time when the stock market averages were climbing, sales were booming, prices were stable, If anything, it was unemployment was under control. It was a time of, I would say, going forward, people were feeling very confident. And in March, I remember it very clearly. I was one of the last people to go to a courtroom. March of 2019, I was in court when they announced literally we wouldn't be back, and they didn't know when we were coming back. And that's how it closed. The economy basically, the doors closed, and there was nothing having to do with economic issues that caused that. The result of that is we've had this pent-up desire for an economic push that's been brewing since March of 2019. And I think what we all have is we're back in that sense of, again, there's been this long hiatus. The hiatus has meant that there's been a loss of some what would have been very good businesses because basically there was nowhere to sell and nowhere to buy. But nevertheless, the fundamentals of what was making the economy strong were still present. And what we're coming to is, again, a situation where there's relatively low unemployment. There's lots of money. We're awash in cash. That if you look at the stock market, that's why the stock market is climbing like crazy. Money's got to go somewhere. And so right now it's going the only place it can, and that's investing in equities. But that money is going to look for other places. And right now, I think we're going to see it come back into the lending sphere. And that means there's going to be credit. That means there's going to be buyers. So from our standpoint, I think this cycle is different from any other cycle that I've ever seen. And I have a lot of optimism that as soon as we can sort of make sure we've shaken everything out, there's going to be a big push, I think a surge economically. And we're all going to see it in the things that we sell and the way in which our markets that we were so active in before the pandemic react on a worldwide basis. Some of the countries are going to be a little closer and a little slower to come online again, but I think we're going to see some major significant boomlets here. Europe is going to come back solid. Asia is going to boom. And I think here in the United States domestically, we're going to see a great period of surge in our economy, except for maybe, if you're a real fundamentalist, you want to tinker with the issue of, will there be so much inflation and that kind of thing. But that's not going to really impact us. There's just going to be people out there wanting to buy. So that gets to the question of why did I pick these two topics, consignment and reclamation? Well, principally because what I do when I'm working with a credit manager is I don't believe, from what I've ever seen, there's a one-size-fits-all solution to every problem. I think a credit manager, what makes a good credit manager is a credit manager has a variety of tools, has a toolbox that allows them to look at different customers in different ways and to apply those tools in a way that fundamentally gets them to the place where they can make good credit decisions based on the fundamentals of their company's needs and what they see in the credit app that they're looking at. So these are two tools that I found in the past have been very useful. And the thing that they both have in common is they are tools that give you some level of control over when your stuff goes out the door and what happens to it when it gets to the buyer's loading docks, and possibly gives you a tool for recovering that inventory that you've sold so that you can take it back. Particularly useful in a situation where there's either stress in your industries because commodities are scarce, or because you've got commodities that you sell that have long shelf lives. So this is one of those deals where I'm saying, okay, there's some self-help tools that you as a credit manager should be thinking about and having set aside. And we're going to talk about those two. So let's start with consignment. Michelle, if you can go back to the prior, there we go. A consignment is a very, very, very old business technique. And essentially it allows you to take your goods, send them to a consignee, somebody who's going to sell them, and let that person hold the goods until they're sold. Consignment is not is something that we don't often think about, but in some industries is huge. I first confronted consignment in modern use in the bankruptcies involving the Sears company. All the jewelry in Sears stores was on consignment. And when we went into the bankruptcy of that process, we had to learn about how those assets were going to be handled. Consignment most recently was very popular in retail, other kinds of retail. Consignment reared its head again as a main source of inventory that was a part of the unraveling process in bankruptcy for the Sports Authority. You may remember Sports Authority's bankruptcy just a few years back. Again, a substantial amount of goods that were in the stores of Sports Authority were there as consigned goods. And the sellers of those goods in bankruptcy were attempting to recover those as assets that really belonged to them and not to the debtor. So consignment is something that continues to have some currency in getting inventory out your door into the hands of a potential seller in a manner that allows you to continue to at least exert some claim of entitlement to the actual asset if it's not sold.